dying mother bear handed her cub to a little child. What happened next brought the crowd to tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The mist hung low over Pine Valley that morning, wrapping the mountain slopes in a ghostly embrace. 9-year-old Lily Morgan sat on the wooden porch of her family's remote cabin, her small fingers tracing patterns in the worn floorboards. Her parents, wildlife researchers Simon and Eleanor Morgan, had moved to this isolated spot in the mountains 3 years ago to study the local bear population. For Lily, the forest had become more home than the bustling town they'd left behind. "Don't wander too far today, Lily," her mother called from inside the cabin. "There's been reports of poachers in the area." Lily nodded absently, her eyes fixed on the tree line. Something wasn't right. She could feel it in the stillness of the birds, in the way the wind seemed to hold its breath. The forest was speaking to her in its own language, one she'd learned to understand during long days spent watching wildlife from her hidden observation spot by the creek. She slipped on her rubber boots and grabbed her sketch pad, her constant companion. Her parents encouraged her artistic talents, especially when it came to drawing the animals they studied. Lily had a gift for capturing the soul behind the eyes of every creature she drew, a talent that astonished even professional artists who had seen her work. As she made her way down the familiar path toward her favorite clearing, Lily heard it, a low, pained moan that sent shivers down her spine. Not human, but not the typical sounds of the forest either. She froze, clutching her sketch pad to her chest as her heart hammered against her ribs. The sound came again, weaker this time. Against every safety rule her parents had drilled into her, Lily found herself moving toward it, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The trees parted to reveal a small stream, and there, collapsed by the water's edge, lay a massive brown bear. Lily gasped, instinctively stepping back, but then she saw it, the dark pool spreading beneath the bear, staining the rocks crimson. The animal was wounded, grievously so. Its eyes, once fierce amber beacons, now glazed with pain, fixed on Lily without aggression. There was something else there, recognition, perhaps, or desperate hope. The bear's massive body shuddered with labored breaths. As Lily watched, frozen between fear and compassion, she noticed movement near the bear's belly. A tiny cub, no bigger than a puppy, nudged against its mother, whimpering softly. The mother bear lifted her head with visible effort, nuzzling the cub one last time before looking directly at Lily. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended species. The dying mother bear began to push her cub forward with her nose, inch by painful inch, toward Lily. "Oh no," Lily whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she realized what was happening. She'd heard her parents speak of wounded animals before, how a mother would sacrifice everything for her young. But this was beyond anything she'd ever imagined. The mother bear was entrusting her baby to a human child. The cub resisted, trying to return to its mother's side, but with a final, gentle nudge, the mother bear pushed it forward. The tiny creature stumbled toward Lily, confused and frightened, its soft brown fur still damp from its mother's protective embrace. Lily knelt slowly, her movements deliberate and gentle. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice broke with emotion. "It's okay, little one." Behind the cub, the mother bear's eyes never left Lily's face. There was an impossible wisdom there, a desperate trust that made Lily's heart ache. As if satisfied that her baby would be safe, the great bear laid her head down one final time, her massive body shuddering with a last rattling breath before growing still. The cub turned, sensing something wrong, and let out a plaintive cry that echoed through the silent forest. It tried to return to its mother, but stopped halfway, torn between going back and moving toward the human child who knelt just feet away, tears streaming down her face. Lily extended a trembling hand, not to touch, but to offer. "I promise," she whispered to the mother bear who could no longer hear. "I promise I'll keep your baby safe." The cub took one hesitant step toward her, then another, its tiny nose twitching as it caught her scent. Behind them, the forest seemed to hold its breath as two worlds collided in this impossible moment of trust and tragedy. Neither of them noticed the small crowd that had gathered at the edge of the clearing. Lily's parents and two forest rangers who had been tracking the wounded bear. They stood motionless, tears in their eyes, as they witnessed a miracle of trust unfold before them. A dying mother's final act of hope, placing her most precious treasure in the hands of a child. The cub whimpered again, a heartbreaking sound that seemed to break the spell. It shuffled forward on unsteady paws, stumbling over a small rock before tumbling right into Lily's lap. She gasped, her hands hovering uncertainly before gently, oh so gently, cradling the frightened creature against her chest. The cub's fur was softer than anything she'd ever touched, and its tiny heart raced against her palm. "Lily," her father's voice finally broke through the silence, urgent but hushed. "Don't move, honey, stay completely still." She looked up, surprised to see her parents and the rangers at the edge of the clearing. "Dad?" she called, her voice quavering with emotion. "The mother, she's gone. She gave me her baby." Simon Morgan took a cautious step forward, his researcher's mind battling with his father's heart. "This is unprecedented," he whispered to Eleanor. "I've never seen anything like it." One of the rangers, a weathered man named Garrett, who'd spent 30 years in these mountains, removed his hat and held it against his chest. "In all my days," he murmured, wiping away a tear with calloused fingers. "That mother bear must have recognized something in your girl. Bears have better instincts than most humans." The second ranger, a younger woman named Talia Chen, had her hand on her tranquilizer gun but hadn't raised it. "The mother was shot," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Poachers. We've been tracking her since yesterday, hoping to help her, but the wound was too severe." Eleanor Morgan, a wildlife veterinarian, knelt beside the mother bear, confirming what they already knew. "She fought so hard to stay alive," she said, her voice breaking. "Just long enough to save her cub." The little bear in Lily's arms had stopped struggling and was now pressing into her warmth, perhaps finding comfort in her steady heartbeat. Lily looked down at the orphaned creature, making a silent vow that the mother bear's trust wouldn't be misplaced. "What happens now?" she asked, already knowing she couldn't bear to be separated from the cub. Her father approached slowly, kneeling beside her. "Normally, the cub would go to a wildlife rehabilitation center," he began, but the look in his daughter's eyes stopped him. He'd seen that determined expression before. Lily had inherited her mother's stubbornness, along with her compassion. "But this isn't normal, is it?" Lily pressed, stroking the cub's head gently. "She chose me, Dad. She trusted me to take care of her baby." The older ranger cleared his throat. "The kid's right. I've never seen anything like this. This isn't just another orphaned cub. This is something special." Eleanor joined them, her medical bag in hand. "We could check the cub here, make sure it's healthy. But Simon, you know as well as I do that our research permit gives us some flexibility. We could make a case for monitored rehabilitation right here." Simon looked between his wife and daughter, then at the tiny bear cub that had somehow fallen asleep in Lily's arms, exhausted by trauma and loss. His scientific mind told him one thing, but his heart told him another. It won't be easy, he warned. Bears aren't pets. Even a cub requires special care, special food, and eventually it will need to return to the wild. I know, Dad, Lily said solemnly. I don't want to keep her forever. I just want to keep the promise I made to her mother. As they talked, none of them noticed the rusted pickup truck parked half a mile away, or the high-powered scope trained on the clearing. Vernon Blackwood lowered his rifle, a cold smile spreading across his weathered face. He'd been hunting these woods illegally for years, taking trophies and selling parts on the black market. The mother bear had been a prize specimen, but he'd been interrupted before he could claim his trophy. Now, seeing the researchers and rangers gathered around her body, he knew he needed to disappear, and fast. Well, well, he muttered to himself. Ain't that a touching scene? He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the forest floor. Guess I'll have to come back for that cub another time. Bears were worth more alive than dead in some markets. Exotic pet traders would pay handsomely for a bear cub, especially one young enough to be trained. Back in the clearing, the decision had been made. The rangers would help transport the mother bear's body back to the research station for a proper examination, hoping to gather evidence that might lead to the poacher. The cub would stay with the Morgans, at least temporarily, under the supervision of Eleanor's veterinary expertise and with special permission from the Wildlife Department, a permission Ranger Garrett promised to secure. She needs a name, Lily said as they walked slowly back toward the cabin, the cub now wrapped in her jacket. How about Hope? Her mother suggested. Because that's what her mother had when she trusted you. Lily nodded, the rightness of it settling in her heart. Hope, she repeated, looking down at the sleeping cub. I won't let you down, she whispered, either of you. As they approached the cabin, a distant thunderstorm rolled over the mountains, as if the sky itself was mourning the mother bear's passing. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, washing away the blood from the forest floor, while somewhere in the darkness Vernon Blackwood watched and waited, his cruel eyes fixed on the child and the valuable prize she carried in her arms. The next few days passed in a blur of activity and emotion. The Morgan family transformed their research cabin into a makeshift nursery for the orphaned cub. Eleanor's veterinary skills were put to the test as she examined Hope, determining she was approximately 3 months old enough to have started eating solid food, but still dependent on her mother's milk and care. She's underweight, Eleanor told Lily as they prepared a special formula in the kitchen. Her mother must have been struggling to hunt properly with that wound. Lily's heart ached at the thought. She must have been so scared and hungry, she said, watching as Hope paced restlessly in the large crate they'd padded with soft blankets. But she still thought about her baby first. Simon spent hours on the phone with colleagues and wildlife officials, documenting every detail of the unprecedented event. Nobody's ever recorded a wild bear deliberately giving her cub to a human, he explained to Lily. This could change how we understand animal cognition and interspecies trust. Word spread quickly through the nearby town of Pinecrest. At first, it was just whispers. The Morgan girl had somehow tamed a wild bear cub. The mother bear had been killed by poachers. The forest rangers were involved in a cover-up. But as often happens in small communities, the story grew and transformed with each telling. 3 days after finding Hope, the Morgans were surprised by a knock at their door. Simon opened it to find Ranger Talia standing on the porch alongside a tall, serious-looking man in an expensive suit. Dr. Morgan, Talia said formally, this is Mr. Lawrence Kane from the State Wildlife Division. He's here about the cub. Lawrence Kane straightened his tie, his expression revealing nothing. Dr. Morgan, I understand you're keeping a wild bear cub on these premises without proper authorization. I'm here to relocate the animal to an approved rehabilitation facility." Simon's heart sank. There must be some mistake. Ranger Garrett assured us he was securing temporary permission while we documented this unprecedented case. Kane's expression hardened. Ranger Garrett has been temporarily relieved of duty pending an investigation into procedural violations. As for your unprecedented case, I've reviewed the report, and it sounds like anthropomorphizing at its worst. Bears don't give their cubs to humans. The more likely explanation is that the mother was delirious from her injuries, and the cub wandered toward your daughter by coincidence. Eleanor appeared beside her husband, wiping formula from her hands. "Mr. Kane, with all due respect, I've worked with wildlife for 20 years. What happened wasn't a coincidence or a misinterpretation. That mother bear made a conscious choice." "And I suppose the bear told you this herself?" Kane replied with barely concealed sarcasm. "The law is clear. Wild animals, particularly apex predators like bears, cannot be kept as pets." "She's not a pet," Lily's voice rang out as she stepped into view. Hope cradled carefully in her arms. The cub had grown noticeably more comfortable with her over the past days, following her around the cabin and sleeping curled against her at night. "She's my responsibility. Her mother trusted me." Kane's expression softened slightly at the sight of the child holding the cub with such tender care. "Young lady, I understand you feel a connection to this animal, but—" "Sir," Ranger Talia interrupted, "perhaps you should see the footage before making your decision." "Footage?" Kane turned to her with a raised eyebrow. Simon nodded. "We have trail cameras set up throughout this area for our research. One of them captured the entire interaction between the mother bear, the cub, and Lily. We've been analyzing it for the past 2 days." Without waiting for Kane's response, Simon led them to his study where a laptop displayed a paused video. He pressed play, and they all watched in silence as the scene unfolded exactly as Lily had described. The wounded mother bear deliberately pushing her cub toward the human child, the moment of connection between Lily and the dying bear, the unmistakable intentionality of the mother's actions. When the video ended, Kane sat heavily in a chair, his bureaucratic certainty visibly shaken. "I've been in wildlife management for 15 years, he said slowly. "I've never seen anything like this." "None of us have," Eleanor agreed. "That's why we believe this case deserves special consideration. We're not asking to keep Hope as a pet. We're proposing a monitored rehabilitation program with the goal of eventual release, while also studying this remarkable case of interspecies trust." Kane rubbed his forehead. The regulations weren't written with situations like this in mind. After a long pause, he nodded. "I'll need that footage, and I'll need regular reports. This will require approvals from people above my pay grade, but I'll see what I can do." As they continued discussing the logistics, no one noticed Lily slip away with Hope, heading to her favorite spot on the porch swing. She sat there, gently rocking, whispering to the cub about the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Your mama is up there now," she told Hope softly. "She can see us, and she knows you're safe." The cub looked up at her with intelligent eyes that seemed too wise for her age, and for a moment, Lily could almost believe that Hope understood every word. A month passed, and summer settled fully over Pine Valley. Hope grew stronger each day under the care of the Morgan family. Her fuzzy brown coat took on a healthy sheen, and her playful personality emerged as she recovered from the trauma of losing her mother. Lily kept a detailed journal of Hope's progress, filling pages with careful observations and delicate sketches that captured the cub's expressions and behaviors. The story of the dying mother bear and the little girl had spread far beyond Pine Crest. A local newspaper reporter had interviewed the family, and within days, the article had been picked up by national outlets. Wildlife experts and researchers from across the country contacted the Morgans, some skeptical, others fascinated by the implications of such deliberate interspecies communication. "They're calling again," Eleanor called out one morning, holding the landline phone against her shoulder as she prepared Hope's formula. National Geographic this time. Simon looked up from his laptop where he'd been analyzing data. "Tell them the same thing we've told everyone else. No film crews, no photo shoots. We're not turning Hope into a circus attraction." Their protective stance had earned them both admirers and critics. Some accused them of hoarding a scientific breakthrough, while others praised their commitment to Hope's welfare above publicity. Lawrence Kane had secured their temporary permit to rehabilitate the cub, but it came with strict conditions and oversight. Lily had become Hope's primary caretaker, a responsibility she embraced with solemn dedication. The bond between them deepened daily, transcending the natural barriers between human and wild animal. Hope followed Lily everywhere, from helping collect research samples in the forest to sitting beside her during evening reading sessions on the porch. "You're getting so big," Lily told Hope one afternoon as they sat by the creek where they'd first met. The cub was now the size of a medium dog, her strength and coordination improving daily. "Soon you'll be hunting for yourself." The thought brought a mixture of pride and sadness. Everyone had been clear from the beginning. Rehabilitation meant eventual release. Hope was not a pet, but a wild animal temporarily in their care. The goal was to prepare her to survive independently in the forest where she belonged. As if sensing Lily's thoughts, Hope nudged her hand with her snout, looking up with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations. Lily stroked the cub's head, treasuring these moments while knowing they were temporary. A twig snapped in the forest behind them. Hope's head whipped around, her body instantly alert. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound Lily had never heard from her before. "It's okay, girl," Lily whispered, even as unease prickled at the back of her neck. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of birds and insects suddenly silent. Another snap, closer this time. Hope placed herself between Lily and the sound, her small body tense with protective instinct. For all her domesticated behaviors, in that moment, Hope was every inch a wild bear. Vernon Blackwood stepped from the shadows, his weathered face twisting into what might have been intended as a friendly smile but looked more like a predatory grimace. "Well, ain't this a pretty picture?" he drawled, his eyes fixed not on Lily but on Hope, the famous bear girl and her little cub. Lily scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. She recognized the man from town. He sold handcrafted walking sticks at the general store and always smelled of tobacco and something sharper, more chemical. Her parents had warned her to stay away from him. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "you startled us." "Did I now?" He took another step forward, revealing the rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "Didn't mean to frighten nobody, just out for a little walk in the woods." His eyes never left Hope. "That's a fine specimen you got there, growing up real nice." Hope's growl deepened, and Lily placed a calming hand on her back, though her own fear was mounting. Something about the way Vernon looked at Hope made her stomach twist with dread. "We need to get back home," Lily said, slowly backing away. "My parents are expecting us." "Now, don't rush off on my account," Vernon said, taking another step forward. I've been meaning to talk to your folks anyway, about that cub." Hope's growl turned into a warning bark, a sound that echoed through the trees and sent a flock of startled crows into the air. Vernon's friendly facade slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Feisty little thing, ain't she? Bet there's folks who'd pay a pretty penny to own something like that. In that moment, Lily understood with perfect clarity what kind of man stood before her. The same kind who would shoot a mother bear for her pelt and leave her cub orphaned. Anger flashed through her, hot and fierce, replacing her fear. "Hope is not for sale," she said firmly, "and she doesn't belong to anyone." Vernon chuckled, a sound without humor. "Everything's for sale, little girl. Just a matter of price." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small that glinted in the sunlight. "Now, you be a good girl and step aside. Your little friend and I are going to take a ride." Before Lily could respond, a deep, thunderous roar shook the forest, a sound too powerful and too primal to have come from Hope's small body. Vernon froze, his face draining of color, as he slowly turned toward the source of the sound. There, on the ridge above the creek, stood an enormous male bear, his dark fur bristling, teeth bared in a terrifying display of aggression. He was massive, at least twice the size of Hope's mother, with scars across his muzzle that spoke of battles won and territories defended. Time seemed to stop as the great bear surveyed the scene below. The human child, the trembling cub, and the man with his hand halfway to his rifle. With deliberate slowness, the male bear rose to his hind legs, towering over them like a living mountain, and roared again. Vernon stumbled backward, fumbling for his rifle, but in his panic the weapon slipped from his grasp. "Jesus Christ," he gasped, all pretense abandoned as raw fear took hold. Lily remained frozen, one arm protectively around Hope, who had stopped growling and was now staring at the male bear with what looked almost like recognition. The great bear dropped back to all fours and began making his way down the slope toward them, each step measured and deliberate. Vernon turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush in blind panic, leaving his rifle behind. Lily knew she should run too. Everything she'd been taught about bear safety told her to back away slowly, to make herself seem non-threatening, to retreat. But something held her in place, the same inexplicable connection she'd felt with Hope's mother. Hope whimpered softly, pressing against Lily's legs but not in fear. It was almost as if— "Do you know him?" Lily whispered, her scientific mind struggling to make sense of what her heart already understood. The male bear approached, stopping about 10 feet away. Up close, Lily could see the intelligence in his eyes so similar to Hope's. He lowered his massive head, sniffing the air, then focused his gaze directly on Lily with an intensity that took her breath away. Slowly, telegraphing her movements, Lily knelt beside Hope. "It's okay," she said softly. "We've been taking care of her. She's safe." The bear made a low, rumbling sound, not threatening, but communicative. Hope responded with a small whine, taking a tentative step toward him. Understanding dawned on Lily with the force of revelation. "You're her father," she whispered. "You've been looking for her." It was impossible, of course. Bears didn't form family units like humans. Males rarely had anything to do with cubs, sometimes even posed a threat to them. That's what all the textbooks said. But as she watched Hope cautiously approach the massive bear, who lowered his head to gently sniff her, Lily knew she was witnessing something science had yet to properly document. The male bear nuzzled Hope briefly, then raised his head to look at Lily again. There was no aggression in his posture now, only a wary assessment. "She's not ready yet," Lily said, feeling strangely certain that he understood. She's still learning to find food, to climb properly. But when she's ready, her voice caught on the words. When she's ready, she should go back to the wild, with you. The great bear held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and lumbered back up the ridge, pausing at the top to look back once before disappearing into the forest. Hope watched him go, then turned to Lily with an expression that seemed torn between two worlds, the human one that had saved her and the wild one that called to her blood. Lily picked up Vernon's abandoned rifle, her hands shaking. "Let's go home, Hope," she said quietly. "We have a lot to tell Mom and Dad." "Absolutely not." Eleanor's voice was firm as she paced the cabin's main room later that evening. "You are not going back to that creek alone, Lily Morgan, not with that man out there." Simon had called the sheriff immediately after Lily returned with her incredible story and Vernon's rifle. Deputies were now searching the area, but Vernon Blackwood had vanished like morning mist. "They're saying he's been suspected of poaching for years," Simon explained, hanging up the phone after his latest call to the sheriff's office. "But they've never been able to prove it. Finding his rifle is the first real evidence they've had." Lily sat by the fireplace, with Hope curled at her feet, still processing everything that had happened. "But Dad, you don't understand. That bear, Hope's father, he protected us. He scared Vernon away." Simon exchanged looks with Eleanor, their scientific minds struggling with their daughter's interpretation. "Lily, male bears don't typically protect cubs. In fact, they can be a danger to them." "I know what the books say," Lily insisted, "but I also know what I saw." He recognized Hope, and she recognized him. They communicated somehow. Ranger Talia, who had arrived shortly after Simon's call to the authorities, cleared her throat. "Actually, there have been some recent studies suggesting more complex social structures among bears than we previously understood. It's rare, but there have been documented cases of male bears showing protective behaviors towards specific cubs, particularly their own offspring." Lawrence Kane, who had been conducting one of his regular inspections when Lily returned, looked skeptical. Even if that were true, the notion that this bear somehow knew the cub was in danger and deliberately intervened is what? Lily challenged. Is as impossible as a mother bear giving her cub to a human child, because we have that on video. Kane fell silent, unable to argue with the evidence they'd already documented. "What if," Simon said slowly, a new light of scientific curiosity in his eyes, "what if we've been fundamentally misunderstanding bear cognition and social structures? What if families of bears maintain some form of bond that we haven't been able to observe because our research methods disrupt their natural behaviors?" Eleanor nodded, the researcher in her engaging with the hypothesis. The mother bear was wounded for days before she found Lily. During that time, the male might have been searching for his mate and cub. "And he followed Hope's scent to us," Lily finished. "He's been watching us this whole time, making sure she's safe." The adults exchanged glances, the implications of such a discovery reverberating through the room. If true, it would revolutionize wildlife biology's understanding of bear behavior and cognition. "We need to document this," Simon said finally. "If there's even a chance that what Lily experienced is accurate, it's too important to ignore." "And what about Vernon Blackwood?" Eleanor asked, maternal concern overriding scientific curiosity. "He threatened our daughter." "We'll increase patrols in the area," Ranger Talia promised. "And the sheriff has put out an APB on Blackwood. His cabin's being searched as we speak." Hope stirred at Lily's feet, perhaps sensing the tension in the room. She looked up at the child who had become her surrogate mother, then to the window where the forest darkness pressed against the glass. For the first time, Lily saw the conflict within the growing cub, the pull between the human world that had saved her and the wild world where she truly belonged. "She'll have to go back, eventually," Lily said softly, voicing the truth they all knew but rarely discussed. "To her real family." No one contradicted her, but the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotion. Hope had become more than a rehabilitation project. She was part of their family now. A bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly distant before that fateful day by the creek. Outside, unnoticed by the humans inside the warmly lit cabin, a large shadow moved at the edge of the forest. The male bear sat on his haunches, watching the lights of the strange den where his cub was being kept. He would wait, he would watch, and when the time was right, he would reclaim what was his. Meanwhile, miles away in a seedy motel room just outside of Pinecrest, Vernon Blackwood nursed his wounded pride with cheap whiskey. His rifle was gone, but his resolve had only hardened. The bear cub would fetch a handsome price on the exotic pet black market, enough to set him up somewhere far from these mountains and the law that was now looking for him. "This ain't over," he muttered to the empty room, scrolling through online news articles about the miracle bear girl on his cracked smartphone screen. Not by a long shot. Autumn painted Pine Valley in brilliant hues of red and gold. The forest transformed. A fiery tapestry stretching across the mountains as far as the eye could see. For Hope, now 6 months old and growing rapidly, this new season brought instinctive urges she'd never experienced before. She spent hours watching falling leaves, pacing restlessly around the large enclosure the Morgans had built behind their cabin, a compromise between captivity and freedom that gave her room to develop her natural behaviors while keeping her safe. Lily sat cross-legged on the ground inside the enclosure, her school books spread around her. Her parents had decided to homeschool her this year, partly because of the media attention that still occasionally disrupted their lives, but mostly because Lily refused to leave Hope for the long hours that traditional school would require. "The equation is simple," Lily explained, pretending Hope was interested in her algebra homework. "If X equals the number of fish in the stream, and Y equals Hope?" The young bear had stopped her pacing and stood perfectly still, nose lifted to the wind, ears swiveling to catch sounds Lily couldn't hear. In the 3 months since their encounter with Vernon Blackwood and the male bear, Hope had grown significantly. She was no longer a cuddly cub, but a powerful young bear with muscles developing beneath her thick coat. Yet she remained extraordinarily gentle with Lily, their bond deepening even as Hope's wild nature became more pronounced. "What is it, girl?" Lily asked, slowly closing her textbook. Hope turned toward the forest edge, a soft whine escaping her throat. It wasn't a sound of fear, but of longing, the same sound she'd made when seeing the male bear by the creek. Lily followed her gaze and gasped. There, at the tree line, stood not one, but 3 bears. The massive male they'd encountered before, and with him, 2 younger bears about Hope's age, but leaner, wilder. "Dad!" Lily called without taking her eyes off the bears. "Mom, they're back!" Simon and Eleanor rushed from the cabin, accompanied by Dr. Maya Patel, a renowned wildlife biologist who had been visiting for the past week to observe Hope and consult on her rehabilitation plan. "Extraordinary," Dr. Patel whispered, raising her binoculars. "The male has returned with siblings? Possibly from a previous mating season with another female." Hope paced anxiously along the fence, her eyes fixed on the other young bears. For the first time, Lily saw something like yearning in her friend's behavior, a recognition of her own kind that no human companionship could satisfy. She wants to go to them, Lily said softly, her heart constricting with the truth she'd been avoiding for months. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. This might be a sign, sweetheart. Hope is growing quickly, and winter is coming. Bears her age would normally be learning crucial survival skills from their mother right now, preparing for hibernation. But she doesn't have a mother, Lily protested, tears welling in her eyes. Simon knelt beside his daughter. Maybe she has a father instead, and siblings who can teach her what we can't. Dr. Patel lowered her binoculars, her expression thoughtful. What we're witnessing defies conventional understanding of bear behavior. That male has returned multiple times, always maintaining a respectful distance. He's not displaying any aggression toward Hope, despite the fact that she carries human scent. And now he's brought other young bears. She shook her head in wonder. It's almost as if he's trying to introduce her to her family, Lily finished. Her real family. The male bear watched them from the forest's edge, his massive presence commanding but not threatening. The two younger bears wrestled playfully, occasionally looking toward Hope with evident curiosity. The transition would need to be gradual, Doctor, Patel cautioned. Hope has become accustomed to humans. She would need time to adjust to wild behaviors, to learn from these bears. What if they reject her? Lily asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if they hurt her because she smells like us? Dr. Patel considered this. Bears have a complex communication system we're only beginning to understand. If these bears are indeed related to Hope, as seems possible given the male's persistent interest, there may be recognition factors that transcend human scent. As they discussed possibilities, none of them noticed the dark figure moving through the forest half a mile away, observing the scene through high-powered binoculars. Vernon Blackwood had spent the past 3 months evading law enforcement, living off the grid in an abandoned hunter's cabin deep in the mountains. His obsession with capturing Hope had only grown, fueled by financial desperation and wounded pride. The isolation had changed him, scraped away whatever veneer of civilization he'd once maintained. His clothes hung loosely on his gaunt frame, and his eyes held a feverish gleam. "Well, well," he murmured, watching the interaction between the bears and the humans. Quite the family reunion. He lowered the binoculars and checked his new rifle, purchased under a false name in a neighboring state. The tranquilizer darts in his pocket were designed for large mammals, enough to bring down a bear without killing it. Vernon had contacts in the exotic pet trade who were willing to pay handsomely for a semi-tame bear cub, especially one with a story as remarkable as Hope's. But seeing the male bear and the other cubs complicated his plan. 1 bear he could handle. 4 was a different matter entirely. He would need to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment when Hope was alone. And he would need to act before the Morgans released her back into the wild. Back at the cabin, a decision was taking shape. After lengthy discussions with Dr. Patel and wildlife authorities, including Lawrence Kane, who had become surprisingly supportive after witnessing Hope's progress, the Morgans developed a transition plan. They would use the large enclosure as a supervised meeting place, gradually introducing Hope to the wild bears under controlled conditions. "It's unprecedented," Kane admitted during a conference call with his superiors. "But this entire situation has been unprecedented from the beginning. The Morgans have documented every step of Hope's rehabilitation, and Dr. Patel's endorsement carries significant weight in the scientific community." Permission was granted for a trial period. The first challenge was coaxing the wild bears close enough to the enclosure for supervised interaction. This proved easier than expected. The male bear seemed to understand their intentions with an uncanny intelligence, bringing his young companions closer each day. "We'll open the small connecting gate tomorrow," Simon told Lily as they watched Hope pacing restlessly, her attention fixed on the forest where her kin appeared each evening at dusk. "Just for a short time, with all of us watching from the observation blind." Lily nodded, trying to ignore the ache in her heart. She had always known this day would come, had prepared herself for it since that first moment by the creek. Hope was not a pet, but a wild creature temporarily in their care. Her rehabilitation had always been about preparing her for return to her natural habitat. That night, Lily sat with Hope in the enclosure under a star-filled sky, just as they had done countless times before. The young bear rested her head in Lily's lap, but her eyes frequently turned toward the forest, her nose testing the air for scents of her kind. "I'll miss you so much," Lily whispered, stroking Hope's thick fur. "But I want you to be happy, to be what you were born to be. Your mom trusted me to take care of you until you were strong enough. I think you're strong enough now." Hope looked up at her with those intelligent eyes that had captured Lily's heart months ago, and for a moment the girl could have sworn she saw understanding there, perhaps even gratitude. Morning arrived with a crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. The Morgans gathered at the observation blind, along with Dr. Patel, Kane, and Ranger Talia. Their plan was simple. Open the small gate at the rear of the enclosure and allow the wild bears to enter if they chose to, monitoring the interaction carefully from a safe distance. Hope sensed the change immediately, pacing excitedly as she watched the humans prepare. The male bear and his two young companions appeared at the forest edge earlier than usual, as if they too understood the significance of the day. "Everyone ready?" Simon asked, his finger poised over the remote control that would open the gate electronically. Lily took a deep breath and nodded, her camera ready to document every moment. This wasn't just an emotional milestone, but a scientific one, potentially groundbreaking research on bear cognition and social structures. Simon pressed the button. With a soft mechanical hum, the gate slid open, creating a 3-foot gap between Hope's enclosure and the wild. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Hope approached the open gate cautiously, sniffing the air but not venturing out. The wild bears remained at the tree line, watching. Then, with deliberate slowness, the male bear began walking toward the enclosure. The two younger bears followed a few paces behind, their curiosity evident in every movement. "This is extraordinary, Doctor," Patel whispered, filming the interaction. "The male is taking the lead, showing the younger bears it's safe to approach." Hope retreated slightly as the massive bear reached the open gate, her body language uncertain but not fearful. The male stopped, not entering but simply standing at the threshold, as if respecting a boundary. He made a soft grunting sound, almost conversational in tone. Hope responded with a similar vocalization, taking a tentative step forward. "They're communicating," Eleanor murmured in awe. "Actually communicating." What happened next left them all speechless. One of the younger bears, slightly smaller than Hope but with the same rich brown coat, darted forward playfully, crossing the threshold into the enclosure. In an instant, the atmosphere changed from tension to joy as Hope and the wild cub began a game of chase, circling and batting at each other with the exuberance of youth. The second young bear joined them moments later, and soon all three were engaged in rough-and-tumble play that was both completely natural and utterly heartwarming. The male bear watched from the gateway, his massive presence ensuring the safety of all three youngsters. Lily captured everything on camera, tears streaming down her face, tears of both happiness and loss. In the playful interaction between Hope and the wild cubs, she could see the future unfolding. Hope belonged with them, learning the ways of her kind, becoming the wild creature she was meant to be. "Look how happy she is," Lily whispered, finding solace in Hope's evident joy. The controlled interaction lasted for an hour before Simon closed the gate, separating Hope from her wild counterparts. The plan called for gradually increasing these sessions over the coming weeks, allowing Hope to develop bonds with the wild bears while still maintaining the safety of human oversight. As the wild bears retreated to the forest, Hope watched them go with visible longing. For the first time, she ignored Lily's call, remaining by the closed gate until the other bears disappeared from view. "It's beginning," Eleanor said gently, putting her arm around Lily's shoulders. "The transition we've been working toward all along." Lily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Hope was changing before her eyes, responding to the pull of her true nature. It was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. None of them noticed the silent drone hovering high above the clearing, capturing everything. A technological eye serving a darker purpose than scientific documentation. Miles away, Vernon Blackwood smiled with cold satisfaction as he watched the live feed on his laptop. The Morgans had just handed him the perfect opportunity. Their carefully controlled transition plan had a fatal flaw. It created a predictable pattern, a time when Hope would be near the forest edge, focused on her wild companions rather than on the humans who had raised her. "Perfect," he muttered, beginning to gather his equipment. The waiting was over. Tomorrow, when the gate opened again, he would be ready. Dawn broke with heavy clouds gathering over the mountains, promising rain by midday. Eleanor checked the weather radar on her phone with concern. "We might need to postpone today's session," she told Simon as they prepared breakfast. "There's a storm system moving in." Simon frowned, looking out at the darkening sky. "Let's see how it develops. The interaction yesterday was so positive I'd hate to interrupt the momentum." Lily joined them, her expression troubled. "Hope didn't eat her breakfast. She's just sitting by the gate waiting. I've never seen her refuse food before." Dr. Patel, who had stayed overnight in their guest room, considered this new behavior. "It's another sign of the transition. Her focus is shifting from human-provided comforts to natural instincts. It's actually a positive development for her eventual release." The words, though kindly meant, pierced Lily's heart. Each step toward Hope's independence was a step away from their bond. She knew it was necessary, knew it was right, but that didn't make it easier to bear. By mid-morning, the storm seemed to be holding off, though distant thunder occasionally rumbled through the valley. The wild bears appeared at the forest edge right on schedule, as if they had internalized the humans' timetable. "Same procedure as yesterday," Simon instructed as they took their positions in the observation blind. 1 hour of supervised interaction, then we close the gate. Lily focused her camera on Hope, who was pacing eagerly by the gate, occasionally standing on her hind legs to get a better view of her approaching kin. The young bear had grown so much in the months since her rescue, developing the powerful shoulders and confident movements of a wild bear. Only her comfort around humans distinguished her from her fully wild counterparts. Simon activated the remote, and the gate slid open. This time, there was no hesitation. Hope bounded through immediately, rushing to meet the 2 young bears who gamboled forward to greet her. Their play began instantly, more boisterous than the day before, as if they were already familiar friends reuniting. The male bear watched from a distance, his massive form partially obscured by the thickening mist that rolled down from the mountains ahead of the storm. There was something different about his behavior today, a restlessness, an alertness that hadn't been present before. "He senses something," Dr. Patel murmured, noticing the change. "Look at how he's scanning the tree line." Ranger Talia raised her own binoculars. "Could be another predator in the area. These mountains have both wolves and mountain lions, though they generally avoid adult bears." The play between the young bears had carried them farther from the enclosure, deeper into the natural forest beyond. Hope seemed completely absorbed in the interaction, following her wild companions in a game of chase that took them in and out of the mist. "They're getting too far away," Eleanor said with concern. "Should we call her back?" Before Simon could answer, a sharp crack split the air, not thunder, but a sound they all recognized with instant dread. A gunshot. Chaos erupted. The male bear roared, charging toward the sound. The two wild cubs scattered into the underbrush, and Hope stumbled mid-stride, a bright orange tranquilizer dart protruding from her flank. "No!" Lily screamed, dropping her camera and bolting from the blind before anyone could stop her. "Lily, wait!" Simon shouted, rushing after his daughter. Vernon Blackwood emerged from the mist, a rifle in his hands and a triumphant smile on his gaunt face. He approached the faltering Hope, a heavy net ready in his other hand. "Finally," he muttered, watching the tranquilizer take effect as Hope struggled to stay on her feet, her movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated. He never saw the male bear coming, 1,000 pounds of primal fury erupting from the mist like an avenging spirit. The poacher had just enough time to register the thunderous roar before being knocked violently to the ground, his rifle flying from his grasp. In the confusion that followed, several things happened at once. Simon tackled Lily to prevent her from running into danger. Ranger Talia drew her service weapon and fired a warning shot into the air, and Hope, fighting the effects of the tranquilizer, staggered toward the sound of Lily's voice, caught between two worlds, the human one that had raised her and the wild one that called to her blood. The male bear stood over Vernon, who lay terrified and motionless on the forest floor. Every human instinct screamed that the massive predator would strike, would tear the poacher apart with one swipe of his powerful claws. Instead, the bear did something utterly unexpected. He roared once more, a sound that seemed to shake the very air, then deliberately turned away, moving to position himself between the humans and the now collapsed Hope. Vernon scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing into the forest as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. "Hope!" Lily cried, struggling against her father's restraining arms. "Dad, let me go. She needs me." "It's too dangerous," Simon insisted, though his scientific mind was reeling at the male bear's behavior. The massive predator was now standing guard over Hope's unconscious form, not aggressive, but clearly protective, occasionally nudging her with his nose as if trying to wake her. Ranger Talia kept her weapon trained on the forest where Vernon had fled. "I've got officers on the way," she said into her radio. "Suspect is armed and dangerous." Dr. Patel approached Simon and Lily slowly. "The tranquilizer will wear off in a few hours," she explained. "But Hope is vulnerable until then. We need to get her back to the enclosure." "How?" Eleanor asked, gesturing to the male bear who showed no signs of leaving Hope's side. "We can't approach her with him there." The rain was falling steadily now, plastering Lily's hair to her head and mixing with her tears. "Please," she whispered, not sure who she was pleading with, her parents, the bear, or some higher power that might be listening. "Please let me help her." As if in response to her voice, the male bear looked directly at her. Their eyes met across the clearing. The child who had raised Hope with love, and the wild father who had never stopped searching for his family. Something passed between them, an understanding that transcended species. Slowly, deliberately, the bear backed away from Hope's unconscious form, retreating just enough to create a path while still maintaining a protective presence. "He's letting us approach," Dr. Patel said incredulously. "I've never seen anything like this." "Let me go to her," Lily pleaded. "Please, Dad, he won't hurt me. I know he won't." Simon hesitated, torn between scientific fascination and paternal protection. "Eleanor?" His wife nodded slowly. "I think she's right. If anyone can approach safely, it's Lily." With extreme caution, Lily moved forward, her steps slow and deliberate. The male bear watched her approach, his massive head following her movement, but he made no aggressive move. "It's okay," Lily said softly, speaking to both the bear and her anxious parents. "We're going to help her." When she reached Hope, Lily knelt beside her friend, gently stroking her rain-soaked fur. The tranquilizer dart still protruded from Hope's flank. With gentle hands, Lily removed it and tossed it aside. The male bear observed every movement, maintaining his distance but clearly intent on the proceedings. "We need to get her out of the rain," Simon said, approaching cautiously with a large transport tarp they used for wildlife rescues. "Lily, can you help us?" Together, they carefully placed Hope on the tarp. The young bear stirred slightly but remained unconscious, her breathing deep and regular despite the tranquilizer's effects. As they prepared to carry Hope back to the enclosure, the male bear followed, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly unwilling to let the humans take his daughter from his sight. The two wild cubs reappeared at the forest edge, watching with evident concern. "Let them come," Lily said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "Let them all come to the enclosure. Hope needs them now." Dr. Patel and Simon exchanged looks, scientific caution warring with the undeniable evidence before their eyes. These bears were not behaving according to any documented pattern. They were demonstrating complex social bonds, communication, and decision-making that challenged everything known about their species. "The enclosure is secure," Simon said finally, "and it would allow us to observe this extraordinary behavior in a controlled environment." They carried Hope back through the rain, the male bear and two cubs following at a distance. By the time they reached the enclosure, the storm had intensified, lightning flashing across the darkened sky. Hope was placed carefully in the sheltered corner of the enclosure where soft bedding had been arranged. To everyone's amazement, the male bear approached the open gate without hesitation, entering the human-made structure with a confidence that belied his wild nature. The two cubs followed, rushing immediately to Hope's side, nuzzling and licking her face as if trying to wake her. "Close the gate," Simon instructed quietly, "but not the inner door to the cabin. If things go wrong, we need a quick exit." The humans retreated to the cabin, watching through the large observation window as the remarkable scene unfolded. The male bear positioned himself protectively near Hope, while the cubs curled up against her, sharing their warmth as the storm raged outside. "They're caring for her," Eleanor whispered in wonder. "Actually caring for her." Lily pressed her hand against the glass, her heart full of conflicting emotions. "They're her family," she said simply. "Her real family." As the hours passed and the storm gradually subsided, law enforcement officers searched the surrounding forest for Vernon Blackwood. They found evidence of his camp, his equipment, even the drone he had used to spy on the Morgans, but the poacher himself had vanished into the vast wilderness. Inside the enclosure, Hope finally began to stir as the tranquilizer wore off. Her first awareness was of the familiar smell of her wild companions, the comforting presence of the cubs pressed against her sides, and the watchful protection of the male bear nearby. When she opened her eyes, her gaze went immediately to the cabin window where Lily stood watching. For a long moment, bear and human looked at each other across the distance, a distance that was both physical and symbolic. In that moment, Lily understood with perfect clarity what needed to happen. Hope had been balanced between two worlds for months, but today's events had shown where she truly belonged. The wild bears had protected her, cared for her, claimed her as their own. They could teach her to survive in the forest in ways that humans never could. "She needs to go with them," Lily said, her voice steady despite the tears that streamed down her face. "Today. Now. While they're all together." Her parents exchanged glances, recognizing the maturity and selflessness in their daughter's decision. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked gently. "We planned for a gradual transition." "Plans changed when Vernon showed up," Lily replied. "He'll come back. He's obsessed with Hope. The only way she'll be truly safe is deep in the forest, with her own kind to protect her." Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "Lily's right. The male bear has demonstrated extraordinary protective behavior, and Hope has bonded with the cubs. The foundation for her successful reintegration is clearly established." Simon put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, immensely proud of her wisdom and courage. "Then, let's say goodbye properly." Together, the family prepared a final meal for Hope, a special mixture of the foods she loved, supplemented with natural forage she would find in the wild. Lily added honey, Hope's favorite treat, arranging everything in the feeding station they had used throughout her rehabilitation. When they opened the inner door, Hope was fully recovered from the tranquilizer, playing with the cubs while the male bear rested nearby. She looked up at the human's approach, her head tilting in that characteristic expression of curiosity they had come to love. "Hey, sweet girl," Lily said softly, setting down the food. "One last meal from us before you go home." Hope approached cautiously, looking between Lily and the wild bears as if understanding the choice before her. She sniffed the offered food but didn't immediately eat, instead moving closer to nuzzle Lily's hand with her now powerful snout. Lily knelt and wrapped her arms around Hope's neck, burying her face in the thick fur, breathing in the wild scent of the creature who had changed her life forever. "I love you," she whispered. "I'm going to miss you so much. But this is right. This is what your mom wanted for you." Hope remained still in the embrace, allowing this final connection. The male bear watched from a short distance, neither interfering nor showing any signs of aggression. It was as if he understood this was a necessary farewell, a transition between one family and another. When Lily finally stepped back, wiping tears from her cheeks, Hope turned to the feeding station and began to eat. The cubs joined her, and for a few minutes the humans watched this ordinary moment that somehow felt sacred. "It's time," Simon said gently when the meal was finished. He moved to the outer gate controls, his finger hovering over the button. "Lily?" She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The gate slid open, revealing the forest beyond, still glistening from the recent rain, golden in the late afternoon sunlight that broke through the clearing clouds. The male bear was the first to move, rising to his full height and walking majestically toward the open gate. At the threshold he paused, looking back at Hope as if calling her to follow. The cubs bounded after him, stopping at the forest edge and looking back expectantly at Hope. She hesitated, looking between the open forest and the humans who had saved her, raised her, loved her. "Go on, Hope," Lily encouraged, her voice breaking. "It's okay, go with your family." Hope took a few steps forward, then stopped again, returning to Lily's side for one last moment of connection. She pressed her muzzle gently against the girl's hand, a gesture that felt like both gratitude and goodbye. Then, with a final look that Lily would remember for the rest of her life, Hope turned and loped toward the waiting bears. Together, the four of them disappeared into the golden-green embrace of the forest, heading toward the heart of the wilderness that was their true home. Lily stood at the open gate long after they had vanished from sight, her parents' comforting presence beside her, but unable to fill the hope-shaped emptiness in her heart. Yet alongside the sorrow was a profound sense of rightness, of a promise fulfilled to a dying mother bear who had entrusted her most precious treasure to a human child. "She'll be okay, won't she?" Lily asked, her eyes still fixed on the forest where Hope had disappeared. "More than okay," Simon assured her, his own voice thick with emotion. "She'll be wild and free and surrounded by her kind. You gave her that gift, Lily, the greatest gift anyone could give." Eleanor wrapped her arms around her daughter. "And we'll still see her, I'm sure. This is their territory. They'll be around." Dr. Patel, who had witnessed the entire remarkable scene, stepped forward. "What you've accomplished here goes beyond Hope's individual story. You've documented interspecies communication and bear social structures that science has never fully understood before. This research could change how we approach wildlife conservation entirely." But these words of comfort, though kindly meant, barely penetrated Lily's awareness. Her thoughts were with Hope, imagining her running through the forest with her siblings, climbing trees, learning to find food, sleeping under the protection of her powerful father, living the life she was meant to live. As the family turned to walk back to the cabin, something caught Lily's eye. A small brown object, partially buried in the soft earth near the gate. She knelt to examine it and felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. It was a pine cone, carefully placed and partially covered with moss, in exactly the way Hope had played with her favorite toys during their months together. A deliberate gift, a final connection. Lily picked it up and held it to her heart, knowing that while Hope had returned to the wild where she belonged, a part of her would always remember the human child who had loved her through her darkest days. "Goodbye, Hope," she whispered to the silent forest. "Be happy, be free." Epilogue. 1 year later, snow blanketed Pine Valley in pristine white, transforming the forest into a winter wonderland. Lily Morgan, now 10 years old, sat at her desk by the cabin window, working on the illustrations for Hope's Journey, the children's book she and her parents had created to share their extraordinary experience with the world. The past year had brought many changes. Vernon Blackwood had eventually been captured trying to cross the Canadian border and now faced multiple charges related to poaching and endangering a child. The Morgans' research on bear cognition and social structures, documented throughout Hope's rehabilitation and release, had been published in prestigious scientific journals, challenging long-held assumptions about these complex creatures. And Lily had grown in ways that went beyond her physical height. The girl who had once been shy and uncertain now spoke confidently at conservation events, her passionate advocacy for wildlife protection inspiring others. Her artistic talents had flourished, her detailed drawings of Hope and the other bears capturing both their physical beauty and their emotional depth. She paused in her sketching, gazing out at the snowy forest. They hadn't seen Hope since that day last autumn when she disappeared into the wilderness with her bear family. Rangers occasionally reported sightings of a female bear with distinctive markings matching Hope's description, always in the company of the massive male and other young bears, but always deep in the protected areas of the national forest. Just as it should be. A movement at the forest edge caught Lily's attention. She leaned forward, squinting through the gently falling snow, For a moment, she thought she glimpsed a large brown shape and two smaller ones beside it, watching the cabin from the boundary where forest met clearing. Her heart leaped. Was it possible? After all this time? She hurried to the door, pulling on her coat and boots despite her mother's questioning call. The snow crunched beneath her feet as she stepped onto the porch, her breath forming misty clouds in the frigid air. There, just visible through the curtain of softly falling snowflakes, stood a young female bear, her rich brown coat dusted with white. Beside her were two smaller bears, likely cubs from a new litter. And standing protectively behind them, massive and majestic as ever, was the male bear they had come to know so well. "Hope?" Lily whispered, hardly daring to believe. The female bear raised her head, seeming to meet Lily's gaze across the distance. There was no way to know for certain if this was Hope, grown now into a beautiful adult bear with a family of her own, or simply another wild bear passing through their territory. But in her heart, Lily knew. And as she stood there in the gentle snowfall, tears freezing on her cheeks, she felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. The mother bear had trusted her child to Lily in a moment of desperate hope, and Lily had returned that child to the wild when the time was right. Now, perhaps, Hope had returned briefly, not to stay but to show Lily that she had survived, had thrived, had found her place in the world that was her birthright. The bears remained at the forest edge for several minutes, watching the cabin, before the female bear turned and led her cubs back into the protective embrace of the trees. The male bear lingered a moment longer, his eyes seeming to meet Lily's in one final connection before he too disappeared into the forest. Lily stood in the snow long after they had gone, her heart full of a joy that transcended the pain of separation. She had kept her promise to the dying mother bear. Hope was wild and free, continuing the cycle of life in the forest where she belonged. And in that knowledge, Lily found her own kind of freedom. The freedom that comes from loving something enough to let it go. "Thank you," she whispered to the silent, snow-filled forest. "Thank you for letting me be part of your journey." As if in response, a pine cone tumbled from a branch, landing softly in the snow at her feet, a small reminder that in this vast wild world, connections formed in moments of compassion could echo through lifetimes, transcending the boundaries between species and touching hearts in ways that changed them forever. Lily picked up the pine cone, cradling it in her mittened hands as she turned to go back inside, carrying with her the memory of a miracle that began with a dying mother bear's trust in a human child, and ended with hope fulfilled. 2 years later, the auditorium fell silent as Lily Morgan stepped up to the podium. At 12 years old, she was by far the youngest speaker at the International Wildlife Conservation Conference. But the audience of scientists, researchers, and policymakers leaned forward with rapt attention. Her story had changed how many of them viewed the natural world. "When I was 9 years old," Lily began, her clear voice carrying through the packed room, "a dying mother bear made an impossible choice. She gave her cub to me, a human child she had no reason to trust. That moment changed everything I thought I knew about animals, about humans, and about the connection between us." On the large screen behind her, photos appeared. The small bear cub in Lily's arms, Hope growing stronger under the Morgan family's care, and finally, the powerful young bear returning to the wild with her bear family. Hope taught me that the lines we draw between species are more blurred than we think. She taught me that animals feel, remember, and make choices with a depth of intelligence we're only beginning to understand. In the front row, Simon and Eleanor Morgan watched their daughter with pride. The miracle bear girl had grown into a powerful advocate for conservation, her story touching hearts around the world. The children's book they had created together, Hope's Journey, had become an international bestseller, its proceeds funding a wildlife sanctuary in the mountains near their home. A protected place where Hope and her kin could live without fear of poachers. But the most important lesson came when I had to let Hope go, Lily continued, her voice softening with emotion. I loved her. But true love sometimes means recognizing when someone belongs somewhere else. Hope belonged in the forest with her own kind, learning to be the wild bear she was born to be. The audience nodded, many wiping away tears. This part of the story resonated with something universal. The courage it takes to let go of something precious so it can thrive as it was meant to. Since Hope returned to the forest, our research team has documented her progress from a distance. Trail cameras have captured images of her with her father, the male bear who never stopped searching for his family. We've seen her learn to fish, to climb, to prepare for hibernation, and last spring we witnessed something miraculous. The screen changed to show a recent photo. A healthy adult female bear emerging from a den with 2 tiny cubs following behind her. Though she had grown, the distinctive markings on her chest identified her unmistakably as Hope. Hope became a mother herself, Lily said, smiling through tears. The cycle continues. Life finds a way, especially when we humans make space for it to happen naturally. Simon stepped up beside his daughter, adding his professional perspective. Our ongoing research has challenged fundamental assumptions about bear cognition and social structures. What happened with Hope wasn't a fluke or an anomaly. It revealed capacities for trust, communication, and family bonds that science had previously underestimated in these magnificent creatures. Eleanor joined them, addressing the practical implications. The wildlife protection protocols we've developed based on our experience with Hope have been implemented in 3 national parks, resulting in a 30% decrease in human-wildlife conflicts and a significant increase in rehabilitation success rates. Lawrence Kane, once the skeptical wildlife official who had wanted to remove Hope from the Morgans' care, now stood as their strongest ally. Sometimes it takes an extraordinary event to make us question our ordinary assumptions, he told the audience. The Morgan family's experience with Hope has revolutionized how wildlife management approaches rehabilitation and release programs across the country. As the presentation concluded and the audience rose in a standing ovation, Lily's thoughts drifted back to that misty morning by the creek, to the moment when a dying mother bear had looked into her eyes and somehow seen something trustworthy there. One act of desperate hope had rippled outward, changing policies, perspectives, and countless lives, both human and animal. But for Lily, the most profound change had been within herself. The shy girl who once sat on the cabin porch drawing in her sketchbook had found her voice and her purpose. Hope had given her that gift. The courage to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves, to stand between the wild and those who would harm it, to build bridges of understanding between species. Later that evening, as the family walked along the hotel's beachfront, Lily spotted something in the sand. A perfectly formed pine cone, far from any pine tree. Her parents exchanged knowing glances as she picked it up, adding it to the collection she'd been finding in unexpected places for years. "Do you think it's possible?" Lily asked, her gaze turning toward the distant mountains where Hope roamed free. "Do you think she somehow knows when these moments matter to me?" Simon, the scientist, started to explain the statistical improbability, but Eleanor squeezed his hand, stopping him. "I think," Eleanor said gently, "that some connections transcend what science can measure. I think the boundary between humans and animals isn't as fixed as we once believed. And I think that when one heart truly touches another, something magical happens, something that doesn't end just because there's distance between them. Lily smiled, closing her fingers around the pine cone. I think so too. They continued walking as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in the same fiery colors as autumn leaves in Pine Valley. Somewhere in the mountains far away, Hope would be preparing her cubs for their first winter, teaching them the ways of the forest, just as her mother had begun to teach her before fate intervened. Two mothers, two daughters, two stories intertwined, one of sacrifice and one of letting go, both driven by the same fundamental force, love that transcends boundaries. And in that understanding, Lily had found the most important lesson of all, that hope, both the emotion and the bear who embodied it, was never truly lost. It lived on in the wild places, in the connections between all living things, and in the courage to trust despite differences. It lived in the willingness to risk everything for the sake of another's future. As darkness fell and stars appeared above the ocean, Lily made a silent promise to the mother bear who had started this journey. A promise to protect the wilderness where Hope and her cubs would live, to tell their story until the world understood its meaning, to keep the connection between their two worlds alive in her heart. And somewhere in the distant mountains, beneath the same star-filled sky, a bear paused in her evening foraging, lifting her head as if hearing a message carried on the wind, a reminder that some bonds once formed in moments of trust and compassion never truly break. They simply transform, becoming part of the invisible web that connects all living things, a web woven of hope and memory, of courage and sacrifice, of letting go and holding on. A web strong enough to bridge the distance between a human child and a bear cub whose paths had crossed in one miraculous moment of trust. Strong enough to last a lifetime.